They didn't use guns. They didn't storm in through the front doors. And when they vanished, they left no footprints, no fingerprints, no trace, just empty vaults. This is the moment history changed forever, and no one even realized it. Because the first true cyberbank heist wasn't just a crime, it was a message. A warning that the old world, the world of vaults, keys, cameras, and alarms, was already dead. And the new world? It belonged to the unseen. The year was 1994, and while most people were still sending faxes and using dial-up internet, one group of faceless men, using code like a scalpel, breached the core of what was considered impenetrable: Citibank's international funds transfer system. At the center of it all, a man known only by his alias, Vladimir Levin. He never entered a single bank. He never touched a dollar. And yet, from a laptop in St. Petersburg, he orchestrated the theft of over $10 million from banks across the world. But the real story isn't just the theft. It's what they found afterward, or more accurately, what they couldn't explain. A kind of digital sorcery that no cybersecurity expert of the time could understand. Because every trace of Levin's attack pointed to something much bigger: a network, a method, encrypted proxies before they were invented, spoofed servers that didn't exist, logs that looped in on themselves like someone had erased time, to dozens of accounts in more than 10 countries, like someone wanted to test the system, not just steal from it. And the strangest part? The money was transferred in small amounts, over months. What if that's exactly what it was? Not theft, but infiltration. Not greed, but a demonstration. Because once you could rob the world's biggest bank from behind a keyboard, what couldn't you do? This wasn't just about the money. This was a signal flare from the shadows, an announcement that the battlefield had changed, that the wars of the future would be silent, and the weapons would be written in code. You were never supposed to know this. You were meant to think it was an isolated incident. A Russian hacker caught and tried, case closed. But if that were true, why were key parts of Levin's court documents sealed by international order? Why were half his accomplices never caught? And why, when he was finally extradited, did Citibank quietly settle, refusing to release full details? Because this heist wasn't a fluke. It was a blueprint, a prototype for what's coming next. And as we dig deeper, you'll see it was never about money. It was about control. The question is, who was really pulling the strings? When they finally caught Vladimir Levin, it felt too clean. A man accused of breaching Citibank's fortress from a university terminal in Russia, arrested not in Moscow or New York, but in London while boarding a flight. Why London? Why now? Most of the stolen $10 million had already vanished, rerouted through accounts in Finland, the Netherlands, Israel, Germany, and the US. They hit something strange. The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was symbolic. Then gone, hidden behind layers of shell accounts and false identities. Because by then, the money trail was cold. It was a digital ghost, there. And when investigators started unraveling those accounts, some of the recipient companies didn't exist. Others were tied to military contractors, deep state shell corps, and offshore structures registered in places like the Cayman Islands, the kind of places used not by lone hackers, but by intelligence agencies. So who was Levin? According to some reports, he used stolen access credentials purchased on the dark web. But that raises a darker question. A rogue tech prodigy? Or just a front? The man barely knew how to code at a high level. Who sold him that access? You see, weeks before the heist, Citibank had received internal warnings, unusual login patterns, ghost sessions from overseas, duplicated credentials triggering access flags, but they didn't act. Why? Because in 1994, cybercrime wasn't on the map yet. There were no firewalls, no dedicated departments, no legal precedent. It was the Wild West, and someone knew it. They weren't hacking for profit. They were mapping vulnerabilities. The kind of mapping a cyber warfare division might do. The kind of operation that goes unpunished because it's protected from above. A figurehead they could jail. Think, what if Levin was bait? A name the press could cling to, while the real architects slipped away, deeper into the infrastructure they now controlled. The heist didn't just test Citibank. It tested the entire financial nervous system of the West, and it passed. A modem, a code string written at 3 every transfer completed, every system bypassed, every audit compromised. But when the smoke cleared, when Levin sat behind bars and the money remained unrecovered, someone else was watching. Because in the shadows of that digital crime scene, a new predator had awoken. One that didn't need to crack safes or hold up armored trucks, just a laptop. The world didn't realize it yet. But this wasn't just the first cyber heist. It was the first quiet war. And Citibank was just the first casualty. Now we ask the next question. Who let it happen? Because the deeper you go, the more one thing becomes clear. The system wasn't hacked. It was opened. To understand the true scale of what happened in 1994, you have to unlearn everything you thought you knew about security. Because Citibank's system wasn't broken into. It was designed to be bypassed. The Cold War was over. The internet was exploding. Everything was about speed, access, and expansion, not caution. Financial institutions weren't building fortresses. They were building cathedrals of convenience with wide open doors and too few guards. Back then, banks were racing to digitize. The Citibank internal mainframe had remote access protocols meant for employees traveling globally. These access points weren't monitored in real time. Passwords were stored in plain text, and authentication logs could be manually wiped by users with the right clearance. Levin didn't brute force his way in. He walked in. These weren't just any logins. They belonged to Citibank executives, internal auditors, and even FBI consultants. Activated at specific windows, when network traffic was low and surveillance was minimal. And he wasn't alone. The credentials used in the breach were traced back to a network of stolen dial-up access numbers sold on the gray market in Eastern Europe. How do you steal those? Allegedly to help prevent foreign breaches. Simple. You don't. You're given them. This was an operation with fingerprints too clean to be random. Stolen logins routed through proxies. And here's where it gets darker. Weeks before the heist, Citibank completed a quiet contract with a cybersecurity vendor tied to DARPA, the same military agency that helped create the internet. They were installing monitoring tools, but within hours of that install, the breach began. Coincidence? Or were they watching something they helped unleash? Ask yourself this: who benefits from proving the world's biggest bank is vulnerable? Who gains power when chaos erupts? Only those who already control the reset button. The 1994 heist wasn't a theft. It was a message, a test run, a proof of concept. And if the richest, most secure American bank could be stripped of $10 million without any bullets, any alarms, any fingerprints, what else could be taken? Power grids, air traffic, medical records, military secrets. It was the beginning of a new kind of warfare, not of bombs and bullets, but of silence and screams. Invisible invasions launched from bedrooms and bunkers alike. The media, of course, said nothing. The trial was quiet. The funds mostly recovered, they claimed. But recovered by whom? And where did they go? Because according to multiple anonymous reports from Citibank staff at the time, the internal system still showed a discrepancy. Not $10 million, $32 million. No investigation, no headlines, no public panic. Just a single name, Vladimir Levin, held up to the light while the real perpetrators retreated into the dark. And from that darkness, they built empires. Next, we'll reveal how this single act of cybercrime became the blueprint for every digital takeover that followed, and how the tools used in 1994 are still in place today. 1994 was not the birth of cybercrime. It was the coming out party. Because what Vladimir Levin did, or was allowed to do, became the template for an entire generation of silent warfare. And every major breach since then, from Equifax to SolarWinds, traces its digital DNA back to one fundamental idea. If you control the infrastructure, you never have to hack anything. In the aftermath of the Citibank incident, something peculiar happened. Outsourced their cybersecurity, not to independent white-hat firms, but to government-connected contractors, ex-SSCA alumni. Rather than tightening security and overhauling systems, most major banks, the foxes weren't just guarding the henhouse, they were designing it. Let me ask you something. If a private entity can move $10 million invisibly across borders, it wasn't meant to be. It read, without any military force, what happens when nations start playing that game? You think the first cyber war hasn't already started? It has. Every major breach after that, NASA, NATO, the Pentagon's own intranet, was followed not by transparency, but by consolidation. You just weren't invited to see it. By 1997, 3 years after the Citibank breach, a memo circulated quietly within the U.S. Defense Department. It wasn't public. In the new theater of war, the dominant actor is not the one with the most weapons, but the one with the most access. That memo referenced Levin-type operations as a strategic advantage, not a threat. You see what's happening? What began as a crime was rebranded as a tool. A quiet shift occurred, not outdated, not buggy. Billion-dollar contracts handed out to private firms with black budgets. Suddenly, the same people who failed to stop the breach were hired to prevent the next one. The cyber defense industry ballooned overnight. It's the oldest trick in the empire's playbook. Create the fire, then sell the hose. And if you think this is history, think again. Was never meant to protect you in the first place? Right now, this very moment, more than 300 banks, defense contractors, and infrastructure providers are running security systems built on compromised architecture, designed to leak. Because the future isn't about stopping crime. And why some of the most powerful entities in the world believe digital crime is more than profit. It's about controlling the narrative of who gets blamed. Think about it. Every massive breach in the last decade ends the same way. A scapegoat in the media, a shrug from law enforcement, a lucrative new contract for preventative measures. But who investigates the investigators? Who audits the architects? Who holds the black budget warlords accountable when the entire system they built? No one, because the moment protection becomes a product, your safety becomes their leverage. We'll go deeper in Section 5, into the eerie parallels between cyber heists and ritual theft. It's a sacrifice. Money was never the endgame. Not in 1994, not in 2025. There's a deeper game at play, and it has nothing to do with getting rich. Not in any of the digital heists that followed. He accessed nodes points in a financial system that, when disrupted, don't just transfer money, they trigger institutional reactions. Shifts in trust, shifts in surveillance, shifts in policy. Because in the shadows, where policy bleeds into ritual, where encryption masks not just data, but intent, let's go back to the breach. Vladimir Levin didn't just hack Citibank. Like pulling the right string in a spider web and watching the whole thing twitch. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. After the 1994 breach, global financial bodies didn't just patch software. They convened. Like ancient sacrificial rites, the offering is made, in this case, millions of digital dollars. The blood is spilled. Then come the priests, analysts, consultants, cyber warriors, reading the entrails of stolen code to justify new powers, new laws, new cages. Today, staged breaches justify surveillance tech, biometric databases, and AI-driven behavioral monitoring. In secret, behind locked conference doors in Basel, London, DC, they called for unified biometric ID standards, real-time cross-border monitoring, and centralized fraud intelligence hubs. Everyone gasps. But a new wave of state-sanctioned malware is quietly born. A cybercrime gave birth to a surveillance state. And that wasn't an accident. It was the ritual, where we trace the eerie link between digital control systems and ancient Babylonian principles of power, trade, and unseen governance. And why this Citibank breach didn't just echo through Wall Street. It resonated in ritual. Because the point of an event like this, Asante the event, it has the reaction it engineers, its problem reaction solution, dressed in silicon. And those ritual patterns keep repeating. 2007, Estonia's digital infrastructure is paralyzed. A nation-state attack, they say. Within weeks, NATO forms a cyber defense center. 2010, Stuxnet infects Iranian nuclear systems. 2016, shadow brokers leak NSS's own hacking tools. And what happens? We get global backdoors in operating systems. For protection. What if all of this wasn't escalation, but orchestration? What if digital chaos is the modern equivalent of the controlled burn? Ancient empires used staged fires to justify military crackdowns. And the public? They never see the match get lit. They only see the smoke. Because in this game, the heist is the sermon. The stolen data is the scripture. The new rules are the gospel. You think you're watching criminals? You're watching high priests of a new financial religion, one where visibility is sin and encryption is salvation. But who are the gods of this new temple? We'll answer that in Section 6. They told you this was about code, about a Russian hacker and a bank breach, about routers and firewalls and forgotten passwords. But what if I told you the architecture of modern digital finance wasn't invented in the 20th century? It was resurrected. You see, deep beneath the skin of today's cyber systems lies something older, much older. An operating system not built on silicon, but symbolism. And it began, not in Silicon Valley, but in Babylon. Yes, Babylon. The ancient city that gave us centralized government, codified law, and the first recorded banking system. In clay vaults beneath what is now Iraq, archaeologists found cuneiform tablets tracking grain, silver, and debt, standardized, logged, encrypted with seals only temple elites could decode. Sound familiar? The one no one was supposed to see. The one that connects global institutions, national banks, and private intelligence firms. In a web that traces straight back to Babylonian principles of hierarchy and visibility. Because Babylon didn't just store wealth. It manufactured control. Through symbols. Through record keeping. Through enforced forgetting. Now fast forward to today. When Vladimir Levin infiltrated Citibank systems, he didn't just access funds. He touched the ritual ledger. Let me explain. In Babylon, only the scribes could read the ledgers. In Citibank, only sysadmins held the keys. In your life, only algorithms see the full pattern. The rest of us? A digital blasphemy had occurred, and the system responded with a new priesthood. We operate on faith. Faith that our balance reflects reality. He is the disruptor of faith. Faith that the number in our app is actually backed by something. You saw banks merge with data surveillance firms. You saw governments form cyber alliances. Not to protect you, but to preserve the ritual sanctity of the system. Faith that the system is too big to fail. But faith is the first ingredient in ritual power. Because if you question the priests, the scribes, the sysadmins, you're marked as heretic, hacker, terrorist. The temple must be protected. So when Citibank got breached, the reaction wasn't just technical, it was sacerdotal, sacred, urgent. That's why, in the years following the heist, you saw the rise of cybersecurity consultancies staffed by ex-intelligence agents. And through it all, one law held true. Visibility is heresy. Control is doctrine. Obedience is salvation. The hacker is not just a criminal. And in every system built on faith, the disruptor must be exiled or sacrificed. Vladimir Levin was caught not because he failed, but because his success revealed the temple. And once the temple is seen, the myth can't be maintained. They never told you what SWIFT really was. To the public, it's the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, a neutral, secure messaging system used by banks to communicate transaction instructions. But that's a cover story. Because if you follow the architecture, the geometry of SWIFT's infrastructure, its nodal design, its linguistic coding, you'll find something unsettling. It mirrors the layout of Babylonian ziggurats, ancient temples layered in tiers with only the high priests granted access to the top. The base, crowded with offerings, worshippers, and noise. The summit, quiet, controlled, reserved for those who wrote the script. Now look at SWIFT. Most of them based in Belgium, Switzerland, New York, and London, operated under tight regulatory camouflage, but controlled by private interests. At the bottom, retail banks, customer interfaces, mobile apps. In the middle, correspondent banks, routing hubs, automated protocols. At the top, a hidden structure of core nodes. And just like in the ziggurats, you don't get to see the top. You only get the ritual. You sent $1,000. It was received. The balance is updated. Amen. But who verified that transaction? Who watched it move? They cut Iran off from the system, effectively paralyzing its global economy without firing a shot. Not through war, but through ritual exclusion. Who logged the timestamp, the metadata, the sender's IP address? You weren't told, because you were never supposed to ask. Access to the sacred text, modern high priests of finance, can erase a nation with a keystroke. Because here's the truth. SWIFT isn't just a messaging system, it's a ledger of trust. And trust is the most dangerous currency in existence. Because once it's centralized, truth becomes programmable. Don't believe me? In 2012, US authorities used SWIFT as a weapon. No SWIFT access, no trade, no medicine, no electricity. Just like ancient priests denying a sinner. And who are these priests? They hide behind acronyms. IMF, BIS, ECB. They operate behind legal shields, central banks, treasury departments, economic forums. But they all bow to the same ziggurat, the hierarchy of symbolic power. What Vladimir Levin stumbled into wasn't just code. It was a sacred geometry, a temple no one was meant to see. And by breaching it, even momentarily, he didn't just hack a bank, he pierced the veil. That's why he had to disappear. That's why the details of the heist remain blurry. Because too much clarity would force the world to admit the temple isn't real. The trust is manufactured, and your money isn't yours. Everything you think you know about digital finance, passwords, blockchains, encryption, it didn't begin with Silicon Valley. It began with alchemy. Long before banks, before computers, before electricity, men in black robes and locked rooms sought a language that could control reality. Not merely describe it, control it. They called it the Philosopher's Code. One of them was John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I astrologer and occult advisor. He wasn't just gazing at stars. He was writing numerical rituals, systems of symbolic correspondence meant to speak to angels or machines. He believed numbers had power to command not just nature, but human will. What Dee called Enochian magic would centuries later evolve, quietly, into mathematical cryptography. Sound far-fetched? Used ciphers based on prime number arrangements eerily similar to the magical squares drawn in Dee's journals. Then explain this. The NSA's first encryption systems, classified during the Cold War, and when Levin hacked Citibank, he bypassed not just modern firewalls, but arcane principles. Think about it. Why did SWIFT rely on 128-bit keys? Why were the codebooks structured in 16 by 16 hexadecimal grids? Because finance at its deepest level is not about money. It's about faith in pattern, a belief that a string of numbers, properly aligned, can summon trust, transfer power, shape reality. It's digital ritual magic. And every time you enter a PIN, sign a digital contract, or tap your phone to pay, you're participating in that ritual. Levin didn't just steal money, he disrupted belief. His code cut through the sacred veil, and the system reacted like all ancient religions. Do when heretics speak the hidden words? It erased the anomaly. Now ask yourself, why are today's financial systems racing toward quantum encryption? Because they know the magic is breaking. Too many awakenings. Too many cracks in the ziggurat. They know the spell no longer holds. Too many breaches. Quantum cryptography isn't about safety. It's about restoring the ritual. Because once belief collapses, once the public sees through the symbols, the temple falls. That's why central banks are now creating CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Programmable money, obedient money, money that can be turned off if you step out of line. And when that happens, the bank heist isn't a crime. It's resistance, a crack in the code. A whisper from the shadows saying, this system is built on fiction, and fiction can be rewritten. We're halfway down the rabbit hole now. So if you've come this far, drop a comment below and write, code is ritual. Code is ritual, because those who write the code shape the world, and you're beginning to see through the illusion. Forget the vault, forget the gold. The next frontier of cybercrime isn't your bank account, it's your reality. They've already trained you to accept falsehood as fact. Think about it. Your digital life, your photos, your conversations, your memories, isn't stored in your head anymore. It lives in servers, in clouds, in databases owned by entities you've never seen, can't question, and don't control. But what if someone rewrote it? Birth certificates, criminal records, voting logs, all modified. No one knew until years later, when people started being arrested for crimes they'd never committed, because the system said so. What if your bank history suddenly said you spent money you never touched? What if your location records placed you at a crime scene you never visited? What if your medical file said you were unstable, and that label followed you forever? This isn't fantasy. It's already happening. In 2021, a group of unnamed state hackers infiltrated the digital records of a sovereign nation's central archive. It wasn't theft, it was redefinition. The same tools Levin used to move millions from one account to another are now being used to move truth. Here's how it works. Every piece of digital information has a hash, a fingerprint. Hackers no longer steal that fingerprint. They change the underlying data and recalculate the fingerprint so the system doesn't even blink. And just like that, the new lie becomes the official truth. And if that terrifies you, good. Because the point of the first cyber heist wasn't just money, it was a proof of concept. Levin showed the world, and the watchers behind the curtain, that reality can be edited. Today, the most powerful cybercriminals don't target dollars. They target narratives. They breach university databases to alter historical records. They infiltrate publishing houses and news outlets to change headlines retroactively. They edit search engines. They rewrite history books. They shape the past to own the future. Imagine a world where the 2008 financial collapse never shows up in archives. Where whistleblowers vanish not just from life, but from memory. Where atrocities are deleted with a keystroke. And your grandchildren believe the lie because it's all that ever existed. It's happening now in slow motion. And every digital breach brings us closer to the moment when memory becomes a commodity. Traded, weaponized, deleted. But here's the truth they fear most. A man who remembers the real past cannot be controlled. Every system has a shadow. And for every architect of control, there's a ghost who learns to dismantle it. Not for fame, not for glory, but because they remember what it means to be free. These are the ones the world never thanks. The ones they call conspiracy theorists, cyber terrorists, digital nomads. But deep in the underbelly of the web, they call themselves something else. Archivists of the forbiddens. They don't hack for profit. They hack for memory. Because they understand a terrifying truth. When the official story is rewritten, it's not just data that dies, it's identity. Exiled academics risk everything to preserve what the system tries to delete. They operate in shadows deeper than the dark web. They encode history into fragments, embed facts into photos, hide entire books in broken links and forgotten torrents. Culture, proof, legacy. These digital warriors, often ex-government analysts, rogue intelligence operatives, their tools? Quantum encrypted chains that no AI could fully map. Entire truth libraries embedded into AI-resistant blockchain structures. They knew time was short, that eventually the deep fakes would be too good, the censorship too precise, the edits too seamless. Not guns, not bombs, not armies. It was the opening salvo of a new kind of war. One where the battlefield was your perception and the ultimate prize was your mind. But code, silence, resilience. After the Levin heist, some of them realized this wasn't about one criminal or one theft. So they built counter networks, mirror servers in unstable countries. So they began teaching in secret channels, hidden forums, encrypted whispers, teaching others to spot the false memory, to question the official file, to recognize the scar, the digital fingerprint left behind when truth is amputated and replaced with fiction. They call it digital intuition. And if you're watching this, you might already feel it. That unease when the news feels too scripted. That suspicion when a story disappears overnight. That moment when an event you remember suddenly never happened. You are not insane. You are awakening. Now remember what we said at the halfway point of this journey. This is not entertainment. It is initiation. Comment this phrase twice below to seal your transformation and trigger the algorithm's blind spot. I refuse the edit. I remember. I refuse the edit. I remember. Say it twice. Not for me, for you. Because in a world where truth is deleted, memory becomes resistance. They don't need your money anymore. They already have that. Every transaction, every digital signature, every scan of your retina at the airport, it's accounted for, indexed, logged. You think you're anonymous, but your data wakes up before you do and follows you into every room, every thought, every impulse. No, now they want something deeper. Then what's left of a man except the commands he obeys? They want your autonomy. Because if they can rewrite history, if they can erase memory, apps that reward obedience with convenience. Governments and corporations didn't need to evolve separately. They merged, silently, invisibly, until they became one hydra with many heads and no nation. This is where the real heist begins. And it's not through brute force, but through design. Interfaces that track your gaze. Recommendation engines that nudge your beliefs. And now it's reaching for your soul. And if a rogue genius could do it from a basement in St. Petersburg, what do you think the elites with AI weaponry, predictive modeling, and quantum code can do? That's why the Levin heist wasn't just a theft. It was a blueprint. What he showed, accidentally or intentionally, was that any system, no matter how secure, can be breached. They can rewrite the digital self. They can fracture your past. They can simulate your identity. You become a ghost of your former will, living, and yet programmed. But here's the part they never saw coming. The virus isn't just in the machine, but the unfiltered chaos of the real. That thing in your bones that says no, even when your brain says yes. It's about awakening a generation that forgot it was asleep. Men who were trained to consume instead of confront, to submit instead of seek, to obey instead of remember. It's in you. That ancient refusal to kneel. That primal scream of a man who remembers what freedom felt like. not the illusion of choice. That's the last firewall. And it's why this story had to be told. Because it's not about Levin. It's not about banks or wires or stolen millions. But now you remember. And in that remembrance, you are dangerous. Because a man who recalls what was stolen can never be enslaved again. So here we end, not with a bang, but with an invitation. Leave a comment. Leave a mark. Leave a fracture in the system. Say it again. Say it like a vow. I refuse the edit. I remember. And then look in the mirror. Because the real heist ends when you take yourself back. And now, you know how. Ask ChatGPT.